right, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can anyone hear me now? Can anyone hear me? This was working yesterday.
It was working today, too.
Can you hear me now?
New York Talent Scout, I can hear you, but not him. Who are you talking about, me or Shane?
I think he can hear you, but not me. Can people hear me now?
I
see a lot of yeses. I guess that means they can hear me now. All right, let me...
Yep, they can hear you.
All right. Well, I've been talking to myself all this time, and Chris, so let me start again by saying hello, everyone, and welcome to 2020. Oh my God, can you feel the fail already?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, maybe we'll have perfect vision because it's 2020.
Yeah. All right, hearing both of us.
Okay.
And as usual, I don't have a subject to talk about, so we can just talk about whatever. We were going well until everyone said they couldn't hear me, but Chris and I were having a great conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, what are we going to talk about? Oh, how about a small green lump of putty I found in my armpit while bathing one summer morning?
Yeah. The second worst poetry in the universe.
Yeah, the last time I told that story, one of the guys listening to me died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
Mm. Yeah, let's see. Put politicians and their mercenaries in basement corridors. Well, don't do that. Who knows what they'll conspire to do down there? Mm. They're kind of like rabbits. Don't put them where they cannot be seen, you know?
Yeah, otherwise they're going to breed all over the place, and then you're going to get a bunch of little bunny governments.
Yep. More rabbits than you know what to do with.
Yep. Yeah, Australia learned that lesson the hard way.
Okay. See, that's a good reason for doing this, because I think I was still cut out when I was saying this. So let me reiterate. This is not the normal supporter live stream, because I usually like to do that more towards mid-month or a little later to give all the monthly supporters a chance to participate. Although, of course, they are welcome to join the voice chat. But I'm just trying to make sure I have all of the bugs shaken out of this, and apparently I didn't. So I don't know why it worked yesterday, but not today.
Yeah, it's 2020, and my New Year's resolution is to take over the world and make you all my slaves.
Yeah. I want to take over the world and leave everyone alone. That's what I want to do.
Where's the fun in that?
Well, it means I get left alone, so that's the nice thing about that.
Yeah, if elected as president in 2024, I promise to replace all the nuclear warheads in our ICBMs with glitter. That way, instead of nuking North Korea to death, we'll glitter bomb them to death.
We'll turn them gay!
Yeah.
And turn Iran gay! And turn Syria gay!
Hey, Angry Forum told me that glitter would actually be much more dangerous, because here's the thing, radiation disappears over time. Glitter, that stuff's gonna be there forever and ever.
Oh yeah, you'll never get it out of your clothes.
Yep, you'll never get it 100% out. There's always gonna be little sparkles here and there.
I think Sarky Opinion is doing a latency check on this. Yeah, I don't really have control over latency. I can go and I can set the latency to normal or low or whatever. I usually keep it as normal, though, because that's where you get the DVR functions and people can go back. But that adds a bit of latency. Yeah. Yep, that's the grand libertarian conspiracy. Take over the world to leave you alone.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny how so many people are like, well, aren't libertarians, just no different than the state they say? They just want to push their views on other people. And like I said, I'm just like, yeah, how dare we leave you alone so you can live the way you want to live? How dare we interfere in that?
Sarky says 31 seconds round trip latency. Yeah. Can't really do much about that, sadly.
Oh, are you from the UK, Sarky?
I'm assuming so.
I guess so.
Well, for lack of another topic, we could talk about what we were talking before we started the live stream, which is all these people talking about, oh, nature is wonderful and nature takes care of us, when nature actually hates you and kind of wants you dead.
Yeah, for people who don't understand the context, I watched the new Godzilla movie, and in a surprise twist, it's the environmentalists who are the villains, not to give too much away, and it's not even like they're portrayed, it's not even like, it's like, well, they're bad people, but they've got good intentions. No, it's established in the movie that their plan is bad and their intentions are bad.
Southern Anakin says, I dare Shane to put on a non-rhotic Southern accent. Yes, I know what non-rhotic means. Thank you.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't hear a lot of the non-rhotic stuff these days. Yeah. I think it's mostly dropped out of fashion.
Yeah.
I can still speak in it, like Luna says, if I ever ended up in a public office, I'd honestly be confused how I got there, considering the only reason I'd have to be there is to dismantle that office.
Oh, I like that politician voice. The stereotypical George W. Bush or Abraham Lincoln voice. Yeah. Speaking of Abraham Lincoln, just random question. I saw this funny dad joke, and it was given by Paul Lindy on Hollywood Squares. It's what state was Abraham Lincoln born in? Oh, the same state as we all were, naked and crying our eyes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that one? What was that one I heard? What did the Amish man say to his brother when he was halfway through making butter? It's your churn.
Oh. Yeah. Amish people. I've actually seen a few of those because my grandparents, live in an area that's got a few Amish communities nearby.
There's some Amish around here. My daughter was like a week old, and when she had to go into a hospital, it was really sad. A valve on her stomach hadn't finished developing, and so she had to be fed for a week. But for I think it was like a day or two, across the hall from us in the hospital, there was an Amish family there getting care for one of their babies. So, and it's just really sad to see, babies with IVs in their arms about the size of their arms.
Yeah, contrary to popular belief, Amish, they are allowed to use technology. It's just that it has to be communally and all that, so you can't own it personally. So,
well, you can't have any technology that goes against a local community, because that's what they're all about, the cohesion of the local community.
Yeah, so, from what I've heard, a lot of Amish communities, they do have things like internet access and all that, but it's often in the community center, and the community leaders have to approve of it, and it's strictly only for, contacting, members on the outside who aren't, who are related to you and you're close with them, but they're not Amish, so...
But yeah, they go to the hospital, they go to the doctor when they're sick, they get vaccinated, yeah. So Southern Anarchist says that he's got a non-rhotic Southern accent because it's still common in Louisiana. So
the Amish aren't they're not as bad as people think they are. They're still crazy with their beliefs, but
they're not harming anyone. Let them live that way.
Yeah, they could be worse. They're
not like those communities who, when someone grows up and decides they want to leave the community, try all sorts of bullying and cultish techniques to stop them. But you got some really extremist, sects of ultra-Orthodox Judaism in New York, and I think a couple other places that are like that. They don't even teach their children English; they just learn Hebrew, and it's all to try to keep them there in the community and not let them leave.
Yeah, and actually, that's another thing I've heard about the Amish is, and one former Amish guy said this is, contrary to popular belief, you don't get shunned if you leave. That's only if you commit a crime against the community. If you choose to leave, they're saying, you know what, you don't have to stay here. If you want to live in the outside world, then that's fine. Just, you can't live there if you're going to do that, but they don't shun you. They can still talk to you, and they'll still, let you visit. You just can't live there is all.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Reeducated, I don't know what a Borat voice is. I know who Borat is, one of Sacha Baron Cohen's characters, but I don't know him well enough to do the voice.
I think it's like, this suit is not black. Yeah. Redacted about the Amish, it's pretty funny because the Amish, it's like they started out as like a crazy, kooky, cult from baptism, but it's slowly evolved into actually now it's just a lot of Amish, I've even heard a lot of Amish people say, they don't 100% believe in everything, but they just like it because it's a simple lifestyle and they just love the sense of community they have. So,
Yeah, I thought it was Lutheran, though.
No, Amish came from Anabaptists, so...
Because I know they were the Pennsylvania Dutch, which refers to not actually Dutch, but German settlers
German.
in Pennsylvania. Deutsch in Pennsylvania, because that's what my ancestors were. Pennsylvania was kind of where you went when you immigrated to America during that time. And of course, a lot of German people did. But the thing is, if you weren't rich, you couldn't really afford land in Venezuela. But then the crown started giving away 1,000-acre deeds in North Carolina. And so, starting around 1750, they came down here to North Carolina. So, yeah, that's basically where I come from.
It's pretty funny about how Spanish is becoming a common language. Guess what? A lot of people fail to realize this, but 200 years ago, the second most common language in the United States. In fact, for a while, it was even more common than English. It was German. Yeah, it used to be German, but then World Wars I and II happened, and German became associated with Nazis and the Kaiser. So.
A lot of them did change their name, but like in my family, they anglicized their names, back in the 1750s or, even before, basically as soon as they came over, just to fit in, I guess.
Yeah, because back then America was ruled by the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and if you were Jewish or Irish Catholic, you were seen as gross.
Well, these were Lutherans.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but still, it's like...
Amish people sell good cookies at fairs sometimes. I love Amish friendship bread. That's good stuff. Especially when you get some real starter from an Amish person. You can do that.
Yeah, I'm not into the whole organic crap and all that, but some of the stuff the Amish produce, it's actually not that bad.
Something looks like it's creating interference in my webcam, and I can't figure out what that might be. I don't think it's the lighting in here, but
I don't know. But yeah, going back to cults and all that, I don't know if I told you this, but there's a YouTuber called Telltale Atheist, and I watch his videos and he's really good at that. But lately he had a guy on and they were talking about cults and whether or not Donald Trump was a cult leader. And guess what? The quote unquote cult expert, he said that libertarians were up there with the cult of Donald Trump. And
well, even before then, like years back, Harvard came out with this thing saying that libertarian should be considered a mental illness.
Wow.
Yeah. I think I did that on the podcast.
Yeah. Mental illness, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty or they're like, oh, but I know a lot of people who used to be libertarians, but then they became neo-Nazis.
Oh yeah, that libertarianism to alt-right pipeline. I think if nothing else, that's a really good indication of why, while it might be okay to make temporary coalitions to go against, certain bills or whatever, trying to form a permanent coalition, because that's what they said. So let's form a permanent coalition with the alt-right. Well, look what happened. The left hate us now because we're an alt-right pipeline, and the alt-right ended up hating us more than they did before we started the coalition. Yeah. So,
and actually the funny irony is that the alt-right, actually started out group, it wasn't full-blown libertarian, but it did want limited government and all that, but then it got hijacked, by the extreme conservatives, kind of like the Tea Party did, only much worse, and they basically took over.
That's what I said to the Tea Party when that started happening. It's like, guys, do not ally with conservatives. That's a death knell.
Yeah. And actually, the same thing happened with, the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party historically used to be pretty limited government, but then it got hijacked by the eugenics movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it got hijacked by the eugenics movement, and it became the Progressive Party.
I think I remember one Hoplu video about coalitions. I don't know how many did he make.
Yeah. When are we gonna, haven't we learned anything from World War I and World War II that forming coalitions and alliances only leads to more conflict and not less?
Yep. Well, yeah. That was what allowed the rise of the Nazis, because the other parties formed a coalition against them, and
yep.
That's what happens.
Speaking of which, I actually read one guy, they were talking about the whole, should, speech, be limited if it's hate speech and all that. And one guy said, well, it was unrestricted hate speech that let the Nazis get in power. It's like, what? Yeah, I'm sorry, but here's the thing. As a guy who actually knows a thing or two about Nazism, guess what? The Weimar Republic and the Austrians, they did everything in their ability to stop the Nazis. Many of the policies that the Austro-fascists passed, which limited political parties, contrary to what your teachers tell you, it wasn't aimed at communists, it was actually aimed at Nazis, and communists just got caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, my webcam was not doing this before. I don't know why. Something works one day and then problems pop up. Hot Blues video, anarcho-coalitionism is a plague. I think that was a few years ago, wasn't it? That was like a couple years ago, if I remember correctly. It was a while back.
Oh, we got a donator question.
Hey! What's your favorite pie flavor? And that's $2 from Pumpkin Row. Let's see. I really like key lime. Key lime's good. I don't know if I can pick one favorite, because cherry pie is really good, too. A nice fresh apple pie right out of the oven. Especially put a scoop of ice cream on the top of it.
Oh, Shane, do you like cream pies? This is the part where you say yes and I throw a pie in your face.
Right. Yeah. Luna Protege, copyright being a monopoly. Though I'm noticing it's the most...
Eccleston.
Yep.
Very underrated Doctor. He's actually the guy that got me to watch Doctor Who then.
Hashtag don't skip 9. Yeah. Though I'm noticing it's the most fragile of them, given the last years, major story universes have bombed at the box office. Well, I mean, that's what happens. You don't have the incentive to be creative, as you did with that. I pointed this out in one of the live streams I did earlier this week. But in Shakespeare's day, none of those plays were copyrighted. Shakespeare did not create Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet. Those stories already existed. Other playwrights were doing them. He just did his version. And
yeah, I think, from what I've heard, one of the reasons why Shakespeare was so successful was because everyone else, was trying to sue him, saying, "Hey, Shakespeare, you're stealing my stuff." Meanwhile, he was creating stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how many of his were original, and a lot of it was either the Queen herself or one of the benefactors or someone like that saying, "Hey, do this, do your version of Hamlet, do something for Twelfth Night," and things like that.
Yeah, and to be fair, as I forgot who quoted it, but it's pretty much universally accepted that almost everything is just a retelling of already classic tropes. Well,
it's like, God, what was it? Was it Sophocles who said that there were really only 3 stories?
Yeah, man versus man, man versus nature, and man versus himself, and every single thing is just a retelling of those 3 story bases.
Yeah, some variation on that.
Yeah. It's pretty funny because one person said, well, what about man versus aliens? That would be considered man versus nature.
Well, it could be man versus man as well. Because a lot of science fiction is done so that the aliens represent, something that man does that they kind of want to expose or put in a bad light, but they don't want to offend people and turn them off. The very people that will be the very, like, in Star Trek when they, painted Frank Gorshin black on one side and white on the other, and with the other guy it was the other way around, and if they had said, okay, it's stupid for a white person to hate a black person just because he's black, they would have gotten a lot of resistance from the racists in the audience, but doing it that way, they could kind of go, hey, that's kind of dumb, and hopefully there's something in their heads to go, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, or another good example, Battlefield Earth, and how that was L. Ron Hubbard, saying, see, this is why psychology is bad, even though he was slowly going insane himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of ex-Scientologists that personally knew L. Ron Hubbard that flat out said that near the end of his life, he was really losing it. Yeah, but then again, L. Ron Hubbard was a flunky artist, was a flunky writer, and a con artist. So
he started a religion because he couldn't hack it as a science fiction writer.
Yeah. And the thing is, he admitted it. There's many people that personally knew him, and he's written it down before many times that he founded it for the sole purpose of making money, and he figured if I can get my religion, state recognized, I'll be exempt from paying taxes. That's all he was in it for.
Dapperton in the chat room. How you doing, Daps? I did not see Joker actually, so I can't really speak to that.
It's good
and I don't think we need to get into the whole Hoppian thing again. I think we've covered that to death.
Yeah.
What would the Borg be? I think the Borg is just the idea. Well, first of all, they're a ripoff of the Cybermen, but yeah, it's just about the collective and the dehumanization of it. Which is weird because everyone accuses Star Trek of being socialist or communist, but they got this major.
No, as film theory pointed out, Star Trek, even if they're not intentionally to, it surprisingly has a lot in common with fascism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they actually dealt with that later on in Next Gen, and even more so in Deep Space Nine, about the more corrupt aspects of the Federation.
Yeah. I've actually heard that's actually the reason why Deep Space Nine is hated, by a lot of diehard Star Trek fans, is because it actually questions, the setting and the environment. It actually kind of thinks, when we think about it, where we ban, trade and we ban, private money and ownership and all that, I think that's actually a bad idea, and it's actually doing more harm than good. And some diehard Trek is like, no, Gene Roddenberry's setting was a perfect utopia. You can't question it.
Yeah, that was really. I think that was Berman and Braga doing that again. And I'm sorry, they are not good writers. They just aren't. Because Deep Space Nine got a lot better, and I think Next Gen 2, when they went over and did Voyager, and they didn't have anything to do with anything else. They were focusing on that.
I mean, I haven't seen a lot of Deep Space Nine, but one thing I do like about it is how they treated the Ferengi, because in the past, the Ferengi were portrayed as, well, for lack of a better word, they were portrayed as stereotypical Jews, but in the Deep Space Nine, they're actually pretty good, and they bring up a lot of good points, and I love the episodes where they pwn the Federation about economics.
Yeah, they kind of mess it up at the end in like the last half season, but other than that, what I usually say is watch the just kind of grit your teeth and make it through the 2-hour first episode just so you know what's going on, and then skip to season 4. Because there's some good stuff in the first 3 seasons, but they're few and far between. And if you want to look up like the websites for the fan favorites and watch those, that's fine. But really start with season 4. That's when it starts really getting good.
I like that. I like that one thing, where they're criticizing, where this one guy wants to buy something from a space auction, and he needs money from the Ferengi because they don't accept, Federation credits, because Federation credits are more or less useless outside of Earth. And he wants the Ferengis and all that. He's like, well, how come you don't have money in there? And he's like, oh, but Earth gave up money so many years ago because we don't need it. And he's like, well, if you don't need Earth money, then you don't need my money.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
That was good. But I mean, when they did Voyager, it was like they wouldn't allow their characters to have any flaws, and there was no real conflict. They all got along, and half these people were supposed to be Maquis terrorists.
Yeah.
This is not something that everyone's just gonna get along holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I mean, they've got a beautiful setup for all sorts of conflict and storyline and character development, and they just didn't do anything with it.
And don't even get me started on Rise of Skywalker.
I've not seen that. I saw the first reboot, but I haven't seen like the last two, the Rise of Skywalker, or what was the one before that, The Last Jedi.
The Rise of Skywalker, it's worse than The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
10 times worse from what I've heard. It's pretty funny though how so many SJWs still continue to deny that Ray's a Mary Sue, and they're like, no, you just hate her because she's a woman. Really?
Yes, Scientology isn't as bad as statism, no cult is. Southern Anarchist and Rainbow Asteroids, they stalk and beg you to pay taxes they can't force you. Actually, they are pretty darn aggressive. They are bullies. They use the power of the state all the time against their members, against anyone critical of them, even getting violent a few times.
Oh yeah, they do it, you know.
Luna, anarcho-capitalism is one of the only non-utopian philosophies that has a somewhat positive outlook. Yeah, I think it's very positive. Yeah. It is about the benefits of working together instead of being like Barney. Like what I really liked about Sesame Street, and since my kids stopped watching it, I have no idea if it's changed over the years, but when they were doing like sharing, they didn't do like the sharing is caring. They had this one thing where Elmo was playing with his trains and Zoe wanted to play with them. And they went through step by step of why it was better that they both get a turn and why the turns get the same length. And they just really laid out the logic behind it. Whereas if you want to have fun playing with your friend, this is what you do.
Yeah, that's a much better way to teach about sharing. Don't teach it because sharing is the right thing to do. No, teach it because it's mutually beneficial to both of you. Which is all trade is.
What is the difference between government and governance? Well, the difference is the initiation of force. Government can force you to go along with what they're doing, whereas governance could just be like the chair of a club or something like that. You have some kind of lodge that you're in, if they even allow lodges anymore. I think most of them have at least been competed out by government regulations. But you got like in the Flintstones, you have the Grand Poobah, but no one has to do what he says because you don't have to. He can't tell you how to live your life. He just runs the group.
SJWism is like Nazism. Yeah, it basically is Nazism. You'd be surprised how much they have that stuff. There was that forum, one time that said Stormfront or Social Justice Warrior, and you'd be surprised how many stuff that SJW say that if you replace the word, cis white male with Jew, it sounds pretty similar to what Hitler would have said.
People are not getting dumber, Readacted. That's the Flynn effect. Look it up. People are getting smarter. And before you bring up another Molyneux thing, the difference between the races in IQ, that gap is closing, and it's becoming, if it's not already, within a standard deviation of each other. So
and people, for those that are saying, well, the world is getting dumber, you need to get information other than Idiocracy, because in all honesty, you've heard of that movie Idiocracy, where the future's dystopian and all that. The reason why I hate that film, and many people have actually pointed that out, is that not only is it not true, but it has kind of an elitist attitude towards it. It's like, we smart people, know what's best for everyone, and we should reproduce, and these dumb, hick hillbillies shouldn't be done that. And one person who was criticizing the movie pointed out, that dumb trailer trash guy, what if the reason why he's like that is because no one's actually trying to help him? Maybe he's got legitimate issues, but you're not helping him. You're just dismissing him as stupid and leaving him to rot.
Yeah.
And by the way, they're always talking about how it's like only idiots are reproducing. Well, yeah, because you got those stupid, ignorant, elitists, saying, oh yeah, but the world's overpopulated, so don't reproduce, because the human population needs to be lowered a few billion before we can start reproducing again. Yeah.
I'm not sure what Rainbow Asteroid said that Southern Anarchist is responding to, but yeah, if you don't pay your taxes, they grab you and throw you in a rape cage.
Yeah. Not to mention, you can get shot and killed for resisting a parking ticket if you resist it hard and long enough.
Yep. You don't pay, and they say, well, failure to show, and they send you notices, and you ignore the notices, and then they come and serve, and they ignore you, and eventually, they're gonna come and throw you in jail or even shoot you over a parking ticket. Because if you don't want to go to jail and you resist them, then they shoot you. and there you've been shot over a parking ticket.
And I hate people when I bring that up, and when I bring that out, and I say that to people, and they're like, well, if you just paid the ticket, you wouldn't have been shot. It's like, well, that you're ignoring. Well, why are people getting shot, for parking tickets? Why is a parking ticket a shootable offense? Why is it such a big deal?
And they say, oh, well, it's not really that. It's that you didn't show up for court. Yeah, but you didn't show up to court over a parking ticket. If you resist long enough, the guns are going to come out.
Yeah. Redacted says, hey, sperm counts and tests are decreasing. I
haven't seen that.
I haven't seen that, but I doubt it's true, because here's the thing. A lot of people that said, infertility is becoming a problem and we're going to end up like children of man. That's not true, because the thing is, a lot of the quote unquote fertility tests aren't actually looking on whether or not people are legitimately able to have kids. It's whether or not they have kids or not, or are planning them. So,
well, and also, sperm count doesn't really mean that much. They used to make a big deal about infertility clinics, and now they found out that, it only takes one, and if you have 9 million sperm instead of 16 million or whatever the norm is, well, I mean, that's still plenty.
I mean, here's the thing, it's kind of gross, but elderly men, contrary to popular belief, they're able to get aroused, and they do have, high sperm levels. It's just that by that point in their age, their sperm's defective. So
yeah, it's more about quality than quantity. But even then, because they used to say, oh, well, look at these sperms, they're broken and they don't perform right. Well, it turns out those sperms actually play a role by kind of keeping the woman's immune system away from the other sperms, and making a little barrier for them to go through. And because the woman's immune system recognizes them as foreign cells, and it's going to try to attack them.
Well, yeah, that too. So,
Black anti-Semitism is on the rise for some reason. I've seen that, but I mean, it's always been the case, like with the Black Panthers and groups like that.
Oh yeah, the Black Panthers. That's pretty funny about a lot of, SJWs. They criticize the Ku Klux Klan. I'm like, yeah, but what about the Black Panthers? They were going around killing innocent white people for no reason than just the fact that they were white. And it's pretty funny because, they tried it because, my history class tried to spin them in a good direction, saying, yeah, they did do some bad things, but they also did a lot of good things, such as opening up daycares, for poor black citizens. So did the freaking Klan.
Yeah.
The Klan had mutual aid societies, and they helped poor white people. It doesn't excuse the fact that they're still a racist organization. The Black Panthers are a racist organization. End of story.
Yep.
Yeah, but they're black, so they can't be racist because they weren't being oppressed.
Southern Anarchist gives 10 billion people as to what the Earth can comfortably sustain. It's actually a lot more than that. And this was, I think, several years ago. But I like the BBC series Horizon. They do a lot of good stuff. And I like David Attenborough. And this was David Attenborough doing a Horizon episode. So I thought it was going to be great, and I was severely disappointed. It was how many people can the planet hold? And I think they got like 14 or 15, billion or something like that. But it was just that same old, Malthusian crap, because you just kind of assume that everything is the way it is. And those Malthusian predictions, every time someone makes them, we just blow right past them because they keep forgetting to account for economic factors.
Yeah, I think you pointed that out. A lot of people that try to, they say, see, the math proves that the Earth can only support certain amount of people. That's only because you're strictly looking at the number of humans and all that, but you're not looking at technological innovations and advancements in moving space because...
Well, because originally they had calculated like 3 billion people, and of course are we at 8 billion, or we're close to it? I don't know if we've topped 8 yet.
Yeah. And the funny irony is that they always talk about how, modern industrialization means we become fat and lazy, and we're going, to overpopulate and overconsume ourselves, yet we see all this in third world countries where they don't have access to that stuff, and not in first world nations.
Isn't the Earth able to handle at least 1 trillion people? That might be pushing it, but I don't know what the upward limit is. You know there's an upward limit because it can't handle infinity people, just as a thought experiment. That, so there is an upward limit somewhere, but I don't know what that would be.
Yeah, And to be fair, one of the reasons why we're having, a population density issue is simply because governments are saying, "Oh no, you can't build new houses unless you kiss our rings and suck our butts because we got to have a plan." I mean, just look at freaking San Francisco.
Purple Wolf says 7.8 billion. Okay, so we're close to it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we topped it or not.
Yeah, Shane, I was watching this one video on Reason.com about a guy that was trying to open up a restaurant bar and arcade, and it almost got shut down because some anti-gentrification people saying, "Oh, we don't want our kids, to be exposed to messages promoting games and all that. That's bad." And the comments are full of people saying, "Okay, so you're uncomfortable with your kids going to a safe, clean environment to play and hang out with friends, but you're okay with them hanging out in crappy public parks next to homeless camps, which are filled with human feces and use heroin needles."
And Lunar Protege is saying, would we rather get our ass off the planet? Well, I'm a tech guy, and so I'm a big believer in making backups. And if you have a sustainable Mars colony, and then an extinction level asteroid smashes into the Earth and kills all the people on the Earth, that would be a great tragedy, but at least it wouldn't mean extinction for humans. We'd continue on Mars and go from there.
Yeah, we'll move on. We'll move on beyond the colonies. The United States and China will merge, but slowly lose, their history. Earth will become the Earth that was, and we'll live on a giant planet called Londinium.
Everyone needs to be a rat in the big cities for some reason. Well, because everything's convenient. I mean, don't get me wrong. I kind of like living out here in the sticks. But, I mean, there's a lot of places where everything you need is within a 2-block walk. I mean, that would be pretty nice, too. I mean, I don't really like being among that many people myself. But, I mean, I can see why...
Well, the problem with some cities is that it's so they have such high population density that, it's just right across the street, but the crowd is such a problem that it takes you an hour to get there.
Yeah. What do you think about the Boogaloo, Shane? I think it's a great dance. I don't really know what the meme's about, though.
The Boogaloo?
Yeah. Also, do you ever go fishing? I do not fish.
So. Going back to the Bugaloo, Shane, from what I've heard, the Bugaloo is a nickname that a lot of, ANCAPs are saying to talk about, the eventual collapse.
Yeah, I don't know. The Boogaloo is something I can't show you on the webcam, but it's like, you step, shuffle, and move your hips to the left, and then you go back and do it to the right, and you just keep going back and forth with it. I would say, check it up on YouTube, and you'll find a lot of dance videos about it, but now it's so much a meme, you might be difficult to find you might want to do how to dance the Boogaloo or something like that.
Yeah.
No, you taught your sister the Boogaloo.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, Shane, because I used to tell this to a lot of my classmates a lot of times. A lot of classmates are always making fun of, teachers and all that because they were slow to adjust to new fads and all that. And I'm like, yeah, don't make fun of your teachers because 40 years from now, you'll be middle-aged parents with a teenage kid and they're talking all this slang and doing all this stuff. And you're going to have, what the hell are these kids thinking about?
Southern Anarchist, idiocracy in many ways would be preferable to the current status system of serfdom. Well, I mean, yeah, what would you rather see a society of? White trash in trailer parks or lefty socialists ruining cities and getting into power and making everything illegal? Pick your poison.
And the funny thing with idiocracy is that we actually tend to see that in socialist societies.
JC Armitage, the state loves cracking down on tiny homes because they weren't up to code. Yeah, and then they complain about how there's not enough housing.
Oh, yeah. And not to mention, and this is back to San Francisco, one of the problems is that there's a lot of anti-gentrification societies, and there's actually this really racist Latino group that doesn't want white people moving into their neighborhood, and they were actually saying that. They were basically saying, we want to preserve our Latino heritage, and they're angry because all these white people wanted to move in and build homes, and they're like, no, that would ruin this area's, culture.
I think I covered one time a study where it looked at the San Francisco Bay Area, all the counties in the Bay Area, not just San Francisco, and they just looked at people who stayed in there. They didn't look at people who left or moved in or whatever. But they found that the more diverse a community was, you had less crime rate, better education, and things like that. And so, you have these black communities where you say, oh, you can't have white people going in there because that's gentrification. But when you do, things turn out better for them. And it's not because, the black people who were criminals are moving away, because they were excluding people who had moved away. If they'd moved anywhere, they'd moved somewhere else in the Bay Area, but they stopped committing crimes just because of the environment they were in.
Yeah,
Because a lot of these, and it's not, before anyone says anything, it's not because they're black, it's just because, they let these run down so much, and they're waging this ridiculous war on drugs that the drug gangs have basically taken over.
Yeah. God forbid my Coca-Cola's worked in water. Good thing redacted, because I don't like Coca-Cola.
Yeah, Pepsi's much better. And Diet Coke is like one of the worst things on the planet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, fun fact, Shane, you were talking about, New Coke one time, and you said that people didn't like the taste of New Coke. Actually, I read somewhere that they said they actually did a blind taste test of it, and they actually found out that people actually preferred New Coke to Coca-Cola Classic, but the problem was that people grew up on Coca-Cola, and they were afraid that New Coke was going to replace their member berries. And
no, that wasn't it. It was when they were doing the taste test, they were giving them these tiny little sips to take. And so when you're doing this little sip of something sweet, and you might go, oh, that tastes good. But when you're actually taking the can and gulping it like people do with soda, and you just get this annihilation of sweet, they didn't like it. So that was why the taste tests went the different way.
Yeah.
Because when they redid taste tests with, independent redid taste tests with people drinking it normally, they found out that people didn't really like it.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I've actually heard somewhere that Coca-Cola, ironically, the soda itself is not actually Coke's number one selling product. It's their hundreds of other products they sell that are actually bringing in the money. Coca-Cola, it's an icon and people have it, but it's not like everyone wants to buy it.
Yeah, they own all sorts of stuff. They have like bottled water companies and things like that.
Yeah, they actually got criticized for that one time in the UK for doing that. Yeah, they tried. Yeah, there was actually a funny story I read about where they went to the UK. And they were trying to sell Dasani, and and they were trying to say, Dasani, not only is it water, it's water with spunk in it. And at the time in the US, spunk, meant like, pump up, hip and cool and all that. But little did they know that that in the UK, spunk is a slang term for something that comes out of a man's body. So
yeah. DJ Arm 67, yes, I did see Yes Minister. Yes, that's a great show. As is the thick of it, the one with Peter Capaldi running around swearing at everybody. Those are really good.
Yeah, I saw little bits and pieces of Life of Brian, and I saw the one. I think it was from Life of Brian. Wasn't there a Life of Brian where they more or less, poke fun of, transsexualism and all that?
Well, there was the guy who wanted to be a woman because he wanted to have babies, and he's like, we can't have babies. Don't you oppress me. I'm not oppressing you. You don't have a womb.
Yeah,
where's the fetus going to gestate? You going to keep in the box?
Yeah, I'm sorry, transsexuals, and I don't want to be called transphobic for it, but I'm sorry, but look, if you want to dress up in clothes and put on fake boobs and all that, that's fine, but you gotta accept the fact you're never going to be 100% a biological woman,
But also notice in that movie, they still considered him one of their own. They started calling him Loretta instead of Stan, and they thought he was dumb for doing it, but he was still one of them, and they still accepted him.
Yeah, even Ben Shapiro said that. He says, look, if you're a guy but you want to put on a dress and call yourself, a girl's name, fine, I'll call you that. You can change, your name all you want, free as the air, but I'm not going to call you a she because you're not a she, And
the funny thing about that was he was going on about, women have the right to perfect right to play a part in our movement, and we need to acknowledge the women and stuff like that. And you had Judith sitting right there across from him, who was a woman, and it was like, why don't you let the woman speak for herself?
Yeah, and actually, Shane, also going back to what you said about wombs, I was talking about how some people were like, oh, but we can have artificial wombs and all that installed in us. But I've actually heard from actual scientists saying, yeah, but it doesn't matter because, you're still biologically a man, and a biological male does not have the chemical and hormonal balance to actually sustain a baby.
Right. First of all, they don't have it working, but even if they did, you'd have to get hormone shots and treatments starting, I think, like a couple of years before you do the pregnancy, because they've done experiments, I think, like on baboons and stuff like that, to see what it would take, and it would take a lot.
Yeah, it's like, well, and did it work? Well, we did have one baboon that gave birth to a baby that survived, but it also had no eyes, and I'm not going to go into that. Basically,
all of the pregnancies were ectopic, so I mean that's a problem.
Which, by the way, are incredibly dangerous. They are possible, but they're not ideal. That's another thing I find funny about the SJW movement is that they talk about how, well, if it's possible, that means it's valid. Like a perfectly good example when they try to talk about how sex, is a social construct and not a biological construct. It's like, because we have actual people, who are hermaphroditic. And I'm like, yeah, whoopity do, but that doesn't mean anything. Yeah, hermaphroditism, or that extremely rare case where the person only has a single X chromosome and nothing else, that's a rare genetic disorder. That's not, an all-natural, third gender.
So Luna Protege is talking about the KYC AML stuff to buy crypto, all these laws that the US and the EU has passed that if you're going to be a money trader, basically selling cryptocurrency, you got to get the person to send in a picture holding up their ID, with themselves and things like that, and give them all your information. It's like, yeah, I want to give a whole bunch of people my information. Yeah, that's totally secure right there. But, so Luna's saying that I'm annoyed at that, but all I have to do is buy digital trading card packs with fiat and trade those for crypto. And actually, if you go to local.bitcoin.com, you can actually buy crypto directly without having to do that, because you're not buying it from the website. You're buying it from another individual who's also using the website, but they're users. They're not, the owners of the website, so they're not doing the money distribution.
DJ Arn said Python predicted SJW. And yeah, it reminds me of that one skit they had where that woman's in the hospital and she's giving birth, and she gives birth to the baby. It's like, okay, show the baby to mom. Now take it there. And she's like, oh, can I hold my baby? Is it a boy or is it a girl? Oh, don't you think it's a little early to be assigning roles for it?
Yeah, that was from Meaning of Life.
Yeah.
Meaning of Life had some good sketches on the whole, though I didn't think it was all that great.
Yeah. Everyone remembers the restaurant scene.
Mr. Creosote.
Yeah.
It is only a wafer thin meat.
Yeah. Yeah, fun fact, I don't want to gross anyone out, but apparently they actually, a lot of people actually got sick while filming that because they were using minestrone soup, the canned stuff, and under heating lights, it caused it to decay really quickly. So, at the end of each take, the entire set would smell like rotten vegetable soup, and it was not pretty.
Yeah. So Zero, driver's license or just a national ID card, right? Yeah, if you get the new ones, and this is the thing they're always talking about in North Carolina, because I don't know if this is national or what, but on North Carolina, if you get the real ID one, they have a little gold star on it, and everyone's like, oh boy, I'm getting an ID with the gold star. It's like, oh my god, you have no idea what that gold star means, do you? It means I can fly on a plane. Okay.
Burger King's Impossible Whoppers is chock full of estrogen. I don't know about that, but from what I've heard, it tastes bad, and a lot of and it's actually ironically more unhealthier than a regular Whopper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Zero, you can't be trans anything. You're still biologically your birth gender. You can't transition into something you're not with current tech. It's interesting. I was hearing about a tribe somewhere in South America, I think, and they're still they have contact with everyone else, but they're still pretty much to themselves. And basically everyone in this tribe is born female, and they're not sure why. They think it might be a combination of diet and genetics. But what happens is if you're a male in the womb, you get this big shot of testosterone, and that starts the sex organs to going. When you hit puberty, you get another big shot of testosterone. Well, what's happening to these kids is they're not getting that first shot of testosterone. And so basically they're all born female, or indistinguishable at least. And they don't consider them to be boys or girls because they don't know, and they just give them neutral names until they get older. And when they get hit puberty, the males get that big shot of testosterone, and then they can grow sexual organs and apparently they become fully functioning males at that point. But they just don't know until they hit puberty and get that other shot of testosterone.
Yeah, but again, that's not a magical third gender. That's just a genetic anomaly. So
it's just something weird that happens.
And that's what I would want to tell those SJWs. Anomalies are not norms.
Well, and this is what because it's something like 0.3% that's transgendered, and they're like, well, that's why a doctor shouldn't assign it at birth, because they don't really know. It's like, okay, if a doctor looks at a kid and assigns it or declares it to be male or female by looking at it, and they're wrong 0.3% of the time, that's a 99.7% success rate. Show me any other medical test that has a 99.7% success rate.
Oh yeah, and not to mention, I especially hate it when people say, oh, but we have kids as young as 6 years old that are confirmed to be transsexuals. I think that's a crock of shit.
Yeah. You don't know until at least you hit puberty.
Yeah. Because I saw this one funny joke one time where a guy said, for a long time, I used to think that I was transsexual because I preferred, doing girly things. I love cooking and clean. I didn't like playing sports. I love drama and all that. And I thought I was actually supposed to be a woman, but then I hit puberty and I realized I wasn't transsexual. I was just gay.
Well, and that's the kind of thing you get, because, if it's not as extreme as this tribe I was talking about, you could just be a boy who got a hit of testosterone, but not a very big one. And so you might grow up kind of with the feeling that you might be a girl or something like that. Then you hit puberty and you really get hit with the testosterone and you're like, oh, okay, I'm a boy. So,
JC Armitage, do you think psychic/mediums are legitimate?
No.
Anyone with a brain can tell you they're snake oil salesmen.
Yeah, or as Houdini said, humbug.
Yeah.
Which was not a nice thing to say 100 years ago.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that.
I think we're getting up. What was it? Was it 25 when Houdini died? So we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of his death.
Yeah. And actually, Shane, going back to humbug, a lot of people like to jokingly talk about, like with Ebenezer Scrooge, like humbug. It's become funny, but people fail to realize back in the old days, calling something a humbug that was basically the equivalent of going up to someone today and saying you're full of shit.
Yeah. It wasn't considered swearing or vulgar or anything like that, but it was pretty offensive. And that's why Dickens chose that word, so the Scrooge could say, Christmas, humbug. Actually, I don't think he actually says, bah, humbug. And he says something like Christmas, bah, and then Fred says something else, and he yells out, humbug. And Fred is outraged. He's like, Christmas, a humbug?
Yeah, especially, I haven't read the book, but I've seen the movie, and he's not saying, oh, Uncle Ebenezer, you always say that. No, he's like, oh, Uncle Ebenezer, please say you don't believe in that. And he's like, oh, I do mean it.
Well, even that's downplayed because, read the book. Fred's pretty outraged. Yeah. The movies are kind of made for today's audiences where humbug is still this cute word, but the book is really good. Despite all its faults, I love the book.
I like the what was that one? I forgot it, but it was that made for TV movie because the actor who plays Scrooge, one thing I like about him is because almost every interpretation of Scrooge portrayed him as a cranky old man and all, but this guy wasn't like that. He wasn't, I hate Christmas because everyone's noisy and loud. He's just like, He doesn't really hate Christmas per se. He just doesn't care for it. That's how he portrays it.
But it was more like he just kind of got cynical about humanity in general.
Yeah, he's just like, he's not. He doesn't hate. The funny irony is that a lot of people like to use Ebenezer Scrooge as an example of capitalism. Yet a lot of things that Scrooge says about Christmas, that's kind of stuff I see a lot of people on the left say. They're like, "Oh, Christmas is a bad holiday because we just buy things we don't need." That's what Scrooge said.
Yeah.
Yeah, people fail to realize Scrooge wasn't this evil, greedy guy, that bathed in money and was like, "Ooh, I love money, I love it." No, he actually. Even though he's rich, he lived like a miserable, poor pauper, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, he lived up in a lumber room. Yeah, and if you look at a lot of the stuff that he does to the pre-transformation Scrooge, it's things that, Dickens said were true about him earlier in life. And so he actually put a lot of himself into Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yeah, people fail to realize Charles Dickens, said that A Christmas Carol, wasn't really a political message. I think it was really more of a reflection on his own life, because even Dickens admitted, he was not a good example of a human being. He was pretty cynical. He was abusive, and really he wrote the book when he had an epiphany about his life.
Well, he was kind of remembering what it was like to be a child, and he was kind of hoping he could recapture that, and that's really that is what. And the George C. Scott version just beautifully depicts that, because there's this one part where you just see him just turn right back into a child again.
When he wakes up and he's like, "Hi, as Kitty," that's a schoolboy, and he's like, "Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." And then he just falls on his bed,
and starts jumping on his bed. Yeah,
and he also plays that prank on Cratchit when he's gonna promote him, but he starts off sounding like he's gonna fire him. Yeah, he's like, "Mr. Cratchit."
Yeah.
Yes, Ebenezer. But he's actually like that,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, George C. Scott he was brilliant.
Yeah, that's why I like that version, is because, and like I said too, even beforehand, he's much more realistically, because like I said, a lot of versions of A Christmas Carol, portray Scrooge as like, "I'm a grumpy old man and I hate everything for the sake of hating everything." But George C. Scott wasn't like that. He was just like, like I said, he was just cynical, but he wasn't exactly, a grumpy old man. He was just cynical.
I still think one of the best adaptations is A Muppet Christmas Carol. Because, they made a lot of changes to incorporate the Muppets and things like that, and they made it a little bit sillier than it was, but still, they kind of captured more of the spirit of the book than a lot of the movies did.
Yeah. Also a common thing I've read from the original book that's different in a lot of interpretations is they often portray, the final scene where Scrooge has the big awakening with the final ghost. He's in a graveyard and the ghost is fading away and leaving him, and he's begging, him for forgiveness. But if I recall correctly, in the original book, the spirit actually chases Scrooge around town. Then he comes across his grave opens up, and he's about to fall into a pit of hell, and he grabs the spirit's robe and he begs for forgiveness, and that's when he wakes up.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think the Disney version actually was the one that portrayed that one the most accurately, because, Scrooge McDuck is about to fall into hell, and, he's begging the third ghost, "Please don't make me go to hell. I won't be this man anymore."
Well, it wasn't hell, because, when you have that, after he first sees Marley and the spell's still going and he looks out and sees all the ghosts out there, they're not ghosts that are from hell, because they're not murderers and rapists and things like that. There are people who regret all of the human connections they didn't make in life, and they look around and they see people in need of help, and they're trying to go and help them, and they can't because they're ghosts. And I mean, that was the whole point of Marley's chains. That wasn't a sentence put on him by some divine power. Marley made those chains every day of his life and had to wear them as a ghost.
That's the line he said. Yeah, that's the line he said. "I forged them, rivet by rivet, just like the ones you have." And he's like, "I see no chains. Mine were invisible too when I was alive."
Yep.
It's kind of like
you don't see regret at the time. Regret only happens when you're looking back. And so when you're at the end looking back and you're saying, how much could I have helped people? How much more time could I have spent with my family and things like that?
Oh yeah. It actually kind of reminds me of this one saying. There was actually an interview, and it was with a Vietnam veteran who was in the thick and thin of Vietnam, and they asked him, like, in the heat of battle, were you ever scared? And he was like, "Oh no, nobody was scared in the heat of battle. We charged in there, and there was not a trace of fear in our blood. It wasn't until after the fact that we got scared and we realized how close to death we came."
Yeah. Well, because they have ways of kind of conditioning you to kind of ignore that part of you, and that's why this is something else. Everyone needs to read Major General Smedley Butler's War as a Racket, and this is one of the things he points out. When you join the military, you go through several weeks of basic training where you learn how to, fight and, maneuver with your gun and everything, and they break down the old man and build up the new one. It's basically psychological torture, and they basically turn you into a killing machine, and even after basic training, they spend months conditioning you to go into battle to make it so that you're the kind of person who can shoot someone else, another human being that you have no quarrel with. But what happens when it's time for them to come home? How much do they do to recondition you to go back in society? And the answer is nothing.
Yeah, that's why a lot of veterans, regardless if they see, combat or not, that's why they struggle, is because, like I said, they literally psychologically brainwash you into a killing machine, and now you're in civilian life and you can't, act the way you do. You can't bring your military manners with you to civilian life, and the government does next to and the military does next to nothing to teach you. They just throw a badge on your chest and say, "Thank you for serving, now go home."
Yep. And you're just tossed back into society, and
and you don't know what to do.
And you really get that. And if you look at a lot of the stuff that's going on today, and you think, well, it wasn't like that in World War I. Read that book. Yeah, it was, because he wrote that before World War II.
Oh yeah,
because he keeps talking about the Great War or the Big War or the World War. He's talking about World War I, but of course, there's not a 1 yet because there hasn't been a 2. Although there's something like the first person to use World War I used the term in like 1919, because basically he saw it coming. He saw what the Allies were doing to Germany, and he was like, this isn't over. They're going to retaliate.
Yeah, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people kind of knew a Second World War was on the horizon. I think if I recall correctly, even one of the generals, one of the generals said, when he looked at the Treaty of Versailles, he's like, guys, this is not a peace treaty. This is just a 20-year ceasefire.
Yep, that's how a lot of historians view it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, exactly. Butler in his book knew another war was coming, and he was talking about how everyone was. He was focusing on America, of course, but he also mentioned the Nazis and the Russians and everyone else.
Yeah. And Redacted said, after Vietnam, the way vets were treated was horrible. Yeah, that's actually why we get the stereotype of a lot of Vietnam vets, being treated poorly when they got back. Because, the thing is, in the other wars, at the very least, when the soldiers came back, they came back to families that were caring for them. But because of the whole controversy with Vietnam, a lot of people were taking their anger out on the soldiers, which is really sad,
So Captain Pipsqueak says, you say that, but ex-military police officers are less likely to use their firearms during a confrontation than non-veteran police officers, so what's the deal with that? Well, because they're better trained in a situation where they can face aggressors. And I mean, if you look, I remember that one video, where it shows, the murder of Daniel Shaver, that guy in the hotel room that they, played games with for 4 minutes and then all of a sudden shot him, which was absolutely ridiculous. And, all of the cops and family members of cops were down in the comments going, oh, well, he had legitimate fear. And the military people in the comments are saying, look, I served, in the Gulf War or wherever. No, once you get a person on the ground, on his knees, legs crossed, and hands laced over his head, at that point, you are in control of everything that happens. So they know about situations like that.
And I've actually seen videos of this training going in place for some of the special forces or military police. They have a training where basically, they get you pumped up and they get you all excited to pull the trigger. And then they have, a guy come at you, but instead of attacking you, he says, hey man, my car broke down. Can you help me? And if you attack him, you're disciplined. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Scorch 88, we are better trained. So are you in the military, Scorch? Yeah, I saw this one thing where they were looking at police training, and this is why I don't believe all of the, God, no, it was a cell phone type of thing, because they're supposed to be trained like this, and this was like a big projection screen where it wasn't a real gun, but it was one that it was kind of like a video game, except it was live footage. And so there's this guy that's coming, and it was like, come here, and the guy reaches into his jacket and is like, don't reach into your jacket. Stop. Get on the ground. All this sort of stuff. And the guy's still walking towards him, pulling something out of his pocket. And the recruit shoots him, and he falls over the ground. Of course, it's just an actor. This is all filmed, and it cuts to different scenes based on what you do. But he shoots him, and so they cut to where he falls on the ground. And then the last thing you see is a close up of him dead on the ground, and the thing he's holding is a card saying he's deaf.
Oh,
yeah. So I mean, they are supposed to be trained for that. When I was in Afghanistan, this is Scorch. We cannot fire at anyone until we're fired upon first, no matter what. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not like every time you see an enemy, automatically kill him. They're actually trained a lot in actually how to de-escalate a situation, whereas the cops seem to do exactly the opposite. They take a relatively peaceful situation and escalate it.
Yeah, actually, Shane, going back to the military, the irony is that there was a conversation about PMCs and all that, and ironically, the example they brought up is actually proof why PMCs are better. They talked about that incident where a couple of Blackwater guys opened fire on a crowd and killed a bunch of people, and I'm like, yeah, and you know what happened to them? They were arrested and charged with manslaughter. They got punished. Whereas what happens if a state military opens fire into a crowd?
Captain Pipsqueak talks about military using tear gas to be classified as a chemical weapon. Yeah, but look at what they did in Waco, Texas. Police did it and got away scot-free. And that was actually CS gas, which I think was actually banned by one of the treaties or something like that.
Yeah. And people to this day still insist, oh no, the ATF did not set the place on fire. It was the cult, even though they haven't been able to prove anything other than an alleged audio recording where David Koresh is apparently giving the order to burn the place down, but you can't hear anything. And basically they just they literally put the subtitles in there. They don't make you listen to it without subtitles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah, I covered that a long time ago, how putting the words on the screen make you hear it.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, contrary to, a lot of people were saying, oh, but tear gas isn't flammable. Well, it wasn't the tear gas, it was the accelerant, because, tear gas grenades still quote unquote explode when they activate. That's the accelerant that's opening.
CS is a powder. It's not a gas. You have to mix it with something to be a powder, and generally it's mixed with something like acetone or benzene, which is really flammable. And I forget the name of the chemical, but there was like one chemical that you could mix it with where it wasn't flammable, but that made it a deadly toxin to humans. So
yeah. And not to mention, according to many people that were survivors of the Waco siege, a lot of them did say, one of the reasons why we couldn't leave the compound, wasn't even just because of David Koresh. It was literally because the people that tried to leave, what happened is the FBI pointed guns at them and said, get back inside. That's literally what happened to them when they tried to, say, okay, you know what? We agree David Koresh is a crazy guy and wanted to leave. They tried to, but the FBI said, no, you get back in the compound and await further orders.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, the worst part was like after the fact, they took the kids and they put them through that awful deprogramming stuff, which is basically psychological torture to try and give them false memories and believe things that aren't true, to try and get them to say that, Koresh was sleeping with children and things like that.
And if I recall correctly, David Koresh, he knew that the end was near. And I think and according to many people that were close to him, they said, in his very final moment, he said, look, if you honestly don't want to go down with me, and I totally understand that, fine. If you're able to leave the building and just leave me here, to my own fate. And like I said, they tried to leave, and the FBI was like, you get back inside. And another thing people fail to realize, the reason why the Branch Davidians acted the way they did was because the FBI was escalating the situation. They were shining and playing, really loud music and sounds of bunnies being strangled, no joke, and basically they couldn't sleep, Well,
Southern Anarchist is saying the government frowns upon people living outside the system. I'll tell you exactly what it was, because it wasn't the FBI to begin with, it was the ATF, and they knew that Koresh had all these guns because he had them legally, and he had this gun license and a gun dealer's license and things like that. And they were figuring, because they have to justify their existence, they were figuring they were going to run in, get all this stuff, and then take out all these guns and parade them in front of the cameras and everything. And after it was over, the FBI checked out all of the guns, and there was not a single illegal weapon anywhere in the compound. They had all been properly registered and everything.
Not to mention, another thing, too, is that, if I recall correctly, the Sheriff's County actually knew some of the Branch Davidians, and basically the attitude was, it's like, yeah, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, they're a bunch of nut jobs, but they're harmless nut jobs. And
well, Koresh was considered a pillar of the community. They're like, yeah, this guy has nutty beliefs, but he's a nice guy. He's a part of the community. He does good for people.
Yeah, and the thing that they were trying to, and from what I recall correctly, the Waco Sheriff's County said, look, if David is legitimately committing a crime, here, let me serve it, because a lot of our people, we know people in the Branch Davidians, some of us know David, and we can try to talk him down to come out and talk to you. And they also told this to the ATF. It's like, look, he knows you're coming, and he thinks you guys are the apocalypse, so I think we should send someone else. And the ATF is like, no, we're going to serve this warrant no matter what. And the result
which, by the way, was not a no-knock warrant.
Yeah, and they basically, they jumped the fence. The ATF agents went in there, and they came across, some Branch Davidians, that were just, doing a patrol. And despite what the ATF tried to say, from what I heard, the Branch Davidians didn't know who they were. They didn't see the ATF logo. They just saw masked man with guns. And to most people, if you see a masked man with a gun, you think, oh my God, this guy is trying to do harm.
Yep. Captain Pipsqueak, the world is thoroughly screwed up when there are more restrictions on what armed forces can do to each other than there are on what a state can do to people. That's well said.
Well, to be fair, that's because the government wants to keep the army, too, because they don't want to lose support of the army, because that's how they can get overthrown. They don't want civilians taking over the army.
Yeah.
That's why they have things like the FBI and CIA. Every single big government has a paramilitary unit within itself for the sole purpose of protecting the state and not serving the military. The Romans had the Praetorian Guard, the Nazis had the SS, the Soviets had the KGB and NKVD and whatnot, and
every country has their own version of it.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember when all that happened. I remember all that very clearly when all that happened. As it was going on. I mean, it was just terrible. I mean, people were saying a lot of these things at the time. A lot of these things are not what we discovered like years later when documents were declassified or whatever. People knew it at the time. And it was like, what the hell? I mean, Clinton can get away with everything, I guess, because he's Bill Clinton. And now Hillary says she's going to run again. Oh boy, that'll be entertaining.
In all honesty, Shane, I ain't gonna lie, one of the reasons why I hoped Donald Trump would win in 2016 was because I saw that interview that Hillary Clinton did, about enforcing the no-fly zone over Syria, and she was very serious about implementing it, and she wanted to implement it, and the generals were saying, Miss Clinton, if we do that, we're gonna drag Russia involved, and you know what that's gonna lead to, and I'm like, oh my God,
she wanted war with Russia. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah. And
Trump has not been great, but as far as the war is concerned, we aren't anywhere as near of a bad situation over there as we would have been with Hillary. In fact, I'm actually quite impressed, relatively speaking, with his restraint in Syria.
Oh yeah, everyone was like, oh, to give credit where credit is due, everyone was like, oh, but we all know Donald Trump, if he gets in world power, he's gonna nuke every single person that criticizes him or makes fun of his stupid. Actually, no, he's actually very calm and all that, and really the only quote unquote, bad thing he did was drop, the Moab on an ISIS hideout, and that was about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's done some other bad stuff there, but I mean, I don't know what it says when you've got like The View, that group of leftists all there who are saying like in Syria, oh, he betrayed our allies, he's left them to the terrorists and stuff like that. And I'm like, that is exactly what conservatives, were saying, with George W. Bush. It's like, oh, if we don't go over there and bomb them, we're not supporting our allies and stuff like that. It's the same rhetoric, only now it's being said by the left.
Yeah.
To justify war. The left is not anti-war. Sorry. No, they're not. Give it up.
Yeah.
That's why I made that meme. I made that meme. It's an empty parking lot just as far as the eye can see, and it says, oh, look, the entire anti-war left shut up.
Yeah, after Obama was in office.
Scorch says, I'm more worried about Trump and Iran. And, yeah, well, actually, he's shown some restraint there, too, because there was a drone that was violating Iran's airspace, and Iran shot it down. And they were like, oh, we got to attack Iran. It says, okay, if we attack Iran, what'll it do? How many people killed? They said, well, we can do it with, as few as 150 people killed. And Trump said, I don't know exactly what he said, but the basic idea was, I'm not going to kill 150 people to avenge a flying robot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, same. Actually, I don't know if it's brought up in War is a Racket, but people have pointed out that war is the perfect example of the sunk cost fallacy at there, because a lot of these conflicts are often caused, because a couple of people got killed, and it's like, oh, we have to avenge, those 10 people that were killed in a terrorist attack, and what happened to them is a tragedy, but how is sending hundreds of thousands of men to their death, a good trade-off?
Yeah, I think he does mention that. But yeah, I mean, we see this all the time. It's like, oh, we can't surrender now. We have to stay in the course and all that stuff. And it's the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Well, we're in there now. We should win it. Sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. And Scorch88 mentions Israel. And, look, I'm not saying I condone what Israel does. And they have done a lot of bullshit. But to Israel's defense, a lot of the reasons they do is because of decades of meddling in the Middle East. Because originally the Israelis and the Palestinians were getting along very well, but then the UN got involved and they tried to divide, Israel together to make things quote unquote fair. And the Palestinians sided with some groups, the Israel sided with other groups, and they ended up, basically creating a war, basically.
Well, I don't know if I would say they got along very well, but they weren't, wipe each other off the face of the planet, in conflict.
Yeah.
And I think the big problem is they made Israel, but they didn't give the Palestinians a homeland. And so what do you get from that? You get Hamas. So, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think everyone's just going to roll over and accept what you do?
Well, and the thing is, Israel did, was perfectly okay. The original plan was to partition Palestine and give, create Israel, and give them Jerusalem and all that. And the Israelis were perfectly fine with that. But then, of course, groups, some group, the Egyptians and the Syrians, who were, big buddies with, the British and the Soviets, said, oh, no, we don't want that. And they launched an invasion, and the United States tried to get Israel on their side, so they funded the Israelis, and we told them, you got to annex all of Palestine now, because if you do, they're going to use Palestine as a front. And now, like I said, we created a religious conflict where there wasn't really one to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, there was a conflict. It just wasn't anything like, it ended up being. And I mean, it would be one thing if it was a case where you had a Palestinian state, and at least something vaguely resembling a democracy like you do in Iran. But I mean, with Hamas, they've actually come out and said, I don't think this was public, I think this is internal documents that were leaked or whatever, but they've actually said that their goal is to try and provoke Israel into attacking civilian populations, solely for the purpose of making the people hate Israel more, so they'll support Hamas in their war of extermination against them. I mean, they know how terrorism operates.
Yeah, and that's the thing that hates me, is because we're buying into that.
Yeah.
And I've actually, if you recall correctly, even ISIS has said, all the drone strikes and all that is the best, recruiting tool we have, because people fail to realize.
That's why they do it. That's why they beheaded those reporters. That's why they've done all of the stuff. Because they know that someone from the West is going to come drop a bomb on them, and then they're going to say, "Oh, well, look at all of the innocent people and the children they destroyed. That's how evil they are, and so you need to join us against them."
Yeah, people fail to realize, ISIS was, goes all the way back to 1999, but before then it was just a teeny tiny little fragment group of nobodies, living in the northern parts of Iraq. But then
it wasn't ISIS; they were just calling themselves the Islamic State, and then they deposed they overthrew Saddam Hussein, and for all his faults, he was at least good at keeping the terrorists out. So then they became ISI, the Islamic State of Iran, and I actually have a video on this. There was, I think it was in 2012.
Then Al Qaeda took over parts of Iraq, and they kept, ISIL at bay because they didn't agree with ISIL. But then when we got rid of them, ISIL said, "Hey, a job opening."
Well, in 2012, I think it was, there was a document made that was later released under the Freedom of Information Act, where the Pentagon is saying, look, if we intervene in Syria, then the Islamic State is going to get their foot in the Levant. And they'll become, because another name for, ISIS is the Islamic State of Iran and Syria, or Iraq and Syria. But another name is ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And so this was the Pentagon saying, look, if we do this, this is going to happen. It's just going to make ISIS, or ISI as they were at the time, it's going to give them a foothold in Levant. It's just going to increase their influence. They knew it was going to happen. They were warned, and they did it anyway.
Yeah, and I'm surprised we didn't learn our lesson from Vietnam because people fail to realize, well, it is true that, a lot of people were sympathetic, to the North Vietnamese country. It wasn't like communism was a big deal. In fact, many of the anti-American protesters were not communism. They just didn't want America getting involved in their affairs. But when we got involved in their affairs, the NVA took advantage of this and said, oh, see, this is why you need communism, because capitalism leads to U.S. imperialism. And as a consequence, we ended up, making Cambodia and Laos hotbeds for communist insurgencies.
I don't get how Southern Anarchist says that Israel isn't an authoritarian theocracy. They are pretty authoritarian, and they are a theocracy. Granted, they're a little bit tolerant of people of other religions living in their country than most theocracies are, but it's still a Jewish state.
I will give Israel kudos. They don't behead, they don't execute you or shun you for being Palestinian. They just...
Okay, they're not totally evil, they're just halfway evil. I don't know.
I don't know what it is, To be fair,
I don't like any of them. That's my opinion with Israel is the same as it is for Palestine. I have nothing but sympathy for the people, and I hope they do well. I hate their governments.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, and like I said earlier, originally when Israel was proposed as a state, it was actually a pretty hands-off, government, and most people didn't want to, and while they didn't necessarily like each other, the Palestinians and the Jews, didn't fight each other because they knew it wasn't in their best interest. But then, like I said, foreign powers got in, they rallied up both sides, and as a result, the uber nationalists like David Ben-Gurion got in power, and they turned, basically, Palestine and Israel into statist societies.
Scorch88 says, most military and vet people I know are tired of all this never-ending war against terrorism. They think we're just messing everything up more the longer we stay. Yeah, and that's probably why when Ron Paul was running for president saying all that, he got more support from active duty personnel than all of the other candidates combined.
Yeah. Funny thing,
and yet they were all like, "Oh, support the troops and don't hate the troops. Support the troops. Support the troops by bringing them home."
Yeah, and actually make the U.S. Army what it was originally envisioned as. And contrary to popular belief, the founding fathers didn't want a standing army. Rather, it was more like a National Guard, basically, and they would only mobilize.
It was something that they could. It wasn't something that was a permanent body. They could just throw it together when they needed to for defense of the. But mostly, it was the militia that was going to be defending the country.
Yeah, and of course, and going back to misinterpretation, that's actually the reason why the draft was allowed, because it's like, oh, but it said Congress, can initiate a military. Can create an army, therefore conscription is constitutional. No, it's not. It's kind of like what they say with the post office. It's like, well, it says the Congress can have a post office, right? That doesn't mean you have to have it. It just says you may set up one if it's needed.
Yeah. Well, and it also doesn't say that no one else is allowed to set up a post office. Yeah, that's a different thing entirely. And Lysander Spooner came along because everyone's like, oh, only government can run a post office and no one can make a private post office and make it and do it cheaper than government. And Lysander Spooner was like, hold my beer.
He founded the United Letter Company or whatever it was called, and from
the American Letter Company.
Yeah, and it was actually, from what I read, it was really successful, and the only reason why it failed is simply because the federal government came in and said, "Oh no, you can't do that."
Yep. Well, and I mean, it's amazing just the outright lie Status will tell about that. They're like, well, he could only do that because he didn't have to deliver to the door, and the post office had to deliver to the door. It was the exact opposite. The post office wasn't delivering to the door, and he was.
Yeah. And people still say that he was actually an anarcho-socialist, not an ANCAP.
Yeah.
And basically, their argument, their justification is, well, he was a member of First International, which was a communist organization, even though, one, there's no proof of that.
It wasn't, at least at the time Lysander Spinner was around, it wasn't solely communist. It had some communist members, but they had a lot of individualists, too.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, I mean, like I said, even if that, and like you said, it wasn't exactly a communist organization at the time. And again, we have no proof of it. And again, they're still, using quote mining, like they're saying about how, oh, look, he's criticizing, all these things and all that. It's like, no, he's criticizing laws interfering with trade. He's not criticizing the trade itself,
Yeah.
And
it was just like they were saying about usury. Oh, he hated usury. No, he hated usury laws.
Yeah, and they also like that. And it's also pretty funny when they're like that one person who said, he clearly was an anarcho-socialist because he didn't want, big corporations. He wanted, communities of mom and pop artisans and all that. Guess what? Libertarians and free market and ANCAPs are for that too.
Well, he thought that he wasn't one to enforce it or anything like communists do. He just thought that's what would happen if you did it naturally. And I mean, I don't think he was correct in that, because I still think there are so many benefits from specialization and division of labor. I don't see how you can make a car without that if you just have one person who just makes the cars and he's trying to make all the parts of the car at one time and assemble them.
Well, that's how. Yeah. Well, for a long time, that's how it was. When the car, people failed to realize cars were first invented in the 1870s, 1880s, and
actually the first one I think was like in like 1790 something. It ran on steam, and the first time someone drove a car was also the first time someone crashed a car because he didn't have a way of steering it.
Yeah, but the point is, cars have been around for a long time, but here's the thing. They were, like you said, they were all custom built, with everyone saying that the parts were interchangeable. And as a consequence, they were so expensive that even the super wealthy couldn't afford them. And it was seen more of, a fad luxury item. It wasn't until guys like Henry Ford came along and said, if we figure out how to streamline this and make it affordable to everybody, we can make some serious money doing that.
Yeah. And that was actually a big thing that popularized the Model T, because they did a demonstration where they took 3 Model Ts, they took them apart and they threw all the parts together in a pile, and then they picked the parts back out of the pile, probably 2/3 of a chance that you're not getting the part, that you did originally, and they put the Model Ts back together and they were all fine, showing that the parts were completely interchangeable.
Yeah,
which was something you couldn't get with a car where each part was specially made for that particular car.
That's why even though Henry Ford technically didn't invent the car, he's still considered, a major player in its creation, because like I said, he was the one that figured out how to get it. And one person actually pointed out, says that's actually much more important than who invented it, because
there's who invented it and there's who made it work.
Yeah, because let's take a look at light bulbs, for example. The first light bulbs, were big, they barely gave off any light, and they only lasted for a few minutes. And it wasn't until guys like Hiram Maxim came along and figured out how to put in the proper filaments and make the gas, the light stronger, that we actually have modern light bulbs that work.
Well, and even like in the light bulbs they had then, I guess this is still going. There's a fire department in Linwood, California that has a light bulb that's been burning continuously, I think, since 1901. And they actually have a webcam on it, or at least did at one, but I haven't seen it in a few years. But for one, I know it's still there. But I mean, you can go and look for it. But the thing you notice about this thing is it's got this really thick filament running all the way through it, and it isn't giving out much light.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got lights that burn out, but they also work better. Yeah, and are probably a lot cheaper, too.
that's another reason why I hate people, that say, "Oh yeah, but things they break down after a year or so, and then you got to buy a new one. It's a ripoff." Yeah, but they're also cheaper and more effective. Whereas like here's a good example I bring up is look at video games. I mean, yeah, video games. People always criticize how it's like, video games aren't hard anymore. They're all too streamlined and all that. Well, here's the thing: video games from the NES era, the reason why they were super duper hard wasn't because they actually wanted to give you entertaining. It's because they were incredibly short and limited. The difficulty wasn't there, to challenge you. It was there to make sure you kept playing because that's really all it was.
It took you longer to get through the game because there wasn't as much of the game.
Yeah, because I mean, a perfectly good example is go on YouTube and look at playthroughs of famous NES games. With the exception of a very few, the majority of them can be beaten in like less than an hour.
Yep.
The reason why video games aren't hard like they used to be isn't because, people are getting stupider or weaker. It's simply because they don't need to be. They're more striven and gameplay focused than they used to be now.
Yeah, they're challenging in other ways.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, so if you have, a tungsten filament that gives off better light and is brighter, and that works so much better than the carbon filaments, and people say, well, it's just because they burn out easily. Well, then why on earth would they make LEDs? Which burn pretty much forever. I mean, not literally forever, they'll dim, but the electronics in the bulb will fail before the LED does.
Yeah.
What do you think? 246 TNT, what do you think of antinatalism? Never heard of it. You know what that is, Chris?
No, I don't.
Right. If you want hard games, look for hard games. Yeah, I mean, you have things of all difficulty levels.
Isaac Clarke, I finished Castlevania, and if I hadn't saved stats, I would have just quit it. So,
save every now and then where you go along, so you can go back and you don't have to restart the entire game.
That's another thing that people forget. That's another thing that people forget about it too. Is like, like, oh yeah, but those NES games, they were hard and in a fun way. And I'm like, are you sure you're not just remembering when you finally beat it and you're just ignoring, the countless nights you had where you were screaming at your TV screen saying, that's not fair, I didn't see that coming.
Well, and also, what did you have to compare to at the time?
Yeah,
Yeah, the 6502 is amazing, but I ain't swapping it for my modernish processor. Well, I mean, you can emulate a 6502. That's nothing.
Yeah.
The original Mario Brothers can be beaten in 5 minutes. I'd like to see that. I guess if you know, like, every single aspect of it and you don't stop to go on all the little side missions underground and everything.
Well, the thing is, a lot of those early games, can be quote unquote beaten in 5 minutes, but the thing is, they're arcades, they're arcades.
Yeah.
And the point
they need to keep the quarters coming.
Yeah. And arcades, the majority of them, especially the early ones, they more or less went on and on, until eventually they got overloaded and couldn't work anymore. But the point is, that was the whole point of them. Like, for instance, Pac-Man, if you're just going to count, the map as a game, if you're good, you can beat that in like less than a minute, but that's not the point. The point
technically you don't really beat Pac-Man until you hit level 256. Because that when you get the integer overflow and the game stops.
Yeah, the game can't take it anymore, and then it just is, yeah.
It's an integer overflow. Antinatalism is procreation is morally bad. Won't that result in like the extinction of the human race?
Well, some people think that's a good thing. They're like, oh, if mankind, voluntarily goes, Earth will be happy and healthy and all that. And I'm like, you're applying human concepts to a planet,
Yeah, the Earth doesn't have emotions. It's a planet.
People stop viewing the Earth as a living thing. It's not a living thing. It's a floating rock in space that has the conditions for life, but it's not.
What does it say that these people have more empathy for a rock than they do for their fellow man?
Yeah, that's what I agree with,
What
by
is
the
the
way,
worst form of communism? For me, it's Khmer Rouge. They even banned eyeglasses. Yeah, the Khmer Rouge was pretty bad. I don't think I'll give you an argument on that.
And you want to know what's funny about the Khmer Rouge is that a lot of communists, like the Khmer Rouge is a perfect example of a no true Scotsman fallacy, because when you bring it up, they're like, oh, Pol Pot wasn't a real communist. Even fellow communists didn't like him. And the Vietnamese, they actually fought to oppose him. Yeah, but they ignored that they put him in power in the first place.
Well, and what is the first thing a communist or socialist does upon seizing power? They go after other socialists because that's their biggest competition.
Yeah, And here's another thing too. The Vietnamese, didn't invade, Cambodia because Pol Pot, wasn't doing communism right, and they were trying to prove that they were anti-fascism. It was because shortly after taking power, he betrayed the Vietnamese and started attacking them. Oh, and by the way, a lot of people like to say, oh, but the United States and the United Kingdom funded the Khmer Rouge. No, we didn't. Well, I mean, yeah, during the Vietnamese-Cambodian War, we funded anti-Vietnamese groups, and some... sorry.
Yeah.
And some of them... whoa, sorry. I always sneeze twice. But anyways, and some of the funding we did go to Neo-Khmer Rouge groups, but the original Khmer Rouge, no, that was all Vietnam, China, and the Soviet Union.
They claim since a baby can't consent to being alive, it's imposing suffering on a child. That's why it's wrong. I don't know. If you don't want to have babies, don't have babies. If you want to have babies, have babies.
You know what that kind of reminds me of? That reminds me of that one woman, that said, oh, all sex is rape because a woman would never voluntarily consent to being penetrated by a penis.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of glad I was born. I mean,
yeah.
I'll support that decision of my parents.
Yeah, it's like... And here's another thing, too, people are always angry, it's like, oh, why was I born, in such bad times? Well, first of all, it may not be as bad as you think it is, but even if it is legitimately bad, you knew that as an adult. How would your parents would have known that? Like, how would your parents would have known that, some evil dictator was going to take over 30 years down the road and make your life miserable?
Billy Joel said, the good old days weren't always good. Tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something we should probably keep in mind in this new year.
Yep.
Yeah, Neil Stone's on. He says, how's your 2020 been going? Well, less than 24 hours in, but it's been going good so far.
Yeah.
Had a little bit of issues getting the live stream started, but
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think I've seen the levels here, so I'm thinking it probably recorded. Okay, so what I'll probably do tomorrow morning is delete the live stream that it puts up there and then upload the archive that I've saved. And
oh, Luna Prodigy, you don't know what the Khmer Rouge is? The Khmer Rouge was the Communist Party of Cambodia. It was founded by Pol Pot, and
basically everyone starved in the wake of it.
Yeah, Khmer Rouge, it's because Khmer, it means Cambodia. That's the Cambodian word for their country, and Rouge means red, so it basically means red Cambodia. And he took power with the assistance of the North Vietnamese, and shortly after he took power, he tried to bring Cambodia to a perfect, socialist utopia, and he felt the best way to do that was to bring everyone down to the peasant farmer level, and basically he launched a massive massacre where they basically killed anyone who was seen as a quote-unquote intellectual. And yeah, they even, what someone said earlier, they did kill people for having glasses because they assumed, oh, you have glasses, so you're smart, so therefore you're not a peasant. In fact, if I recall correctly, in Pol Pot's Cambodia, being a starving, piss-poor, rice farmer was actually considered the ideal person. That's what everyone should strive to be. Because
the difference between today and yesterday is whether the sun has come up yet, because it's already tomorrow in a lot of parts of the world. When I started the live stream, I think it was 1 a.m. in Britain. So
yeah, or as that other old saying goes, today is a gift. That's why it's called the present.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's glib, but it's true.
Yeah, yesterday is complete history and tomorrow's a mystery.
Yeah. Neil Stone wants to know if I got the video on Discord. I got your message, but I haven't had a chance to watch the video yet. I've been trying to get all this. And then tomorrow, I'm going to have to spend that time because I got to do the year-end wrap-up for the Bugosity podcast. And at some point, I've gone 2 whole weeks without quickies. And I think that's the longest I've ever gone without quickies since I started them. So I really need to get the next set done. It's just been so much recovering from the rebuild and all that.
Luna protege. Weird how communists seem to keep using poetic names for "we're here to take your stuff." Yeah, and and you'd be and it's funny when you say, "Oh, so does that mean I can come and take your stuff then?"
Worst letter for argument: gravity doesn't exist because it can jump in the air. I remember that one. Yeah.
Oh really yeah. Dumb. Well, yeah, if gravity didn't exist, you wouldn't even be able to jump because you'd be floating away.
Yeah, you jump and you just go out into space and die.
Yeah, you know.
Instead of spending less, this is Isaac Clarke, the nutheads, he's talking about Italy. Nutheads from center to left want to raise taxes, mainly to the rich and companies without realizing that shifts cost all. Yep. Will there still be a 2019 year in review? Yeah, that's what I'll be working on tomorrow. I need more of the co-hosts to send in their nominations.
Yeah.
We didn't have that much in the way of co-hosts this past year just because of everyone's time constraints. But.
Yeah, I wouldn't. To be honest, I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't even know if I would be able to submit one, and it's not because I can't think of one. It's just because there's so many that, in all honesty, it's next to impossible because there's been so many idiots this year.
I'm pretty sure I know who I'm going to make idiot of the year, but we'll see.
Yeah, the news media, is being a bunch of idiots. The European Union is being a bunch of idiots. The FTC is being a bunch of idiots.
Yep.
Yeah,
the state will enact its own downfall in the crypto age of tech. I'm just curious on the time. Yeah, I mean, the timing is going to matter because we don't want to be like in the situation Venezuela is where it's already collapsed, but people are still trying to build out the technology. And so they're trying to adopt, like the Dash cryptocurrency, but, they're still building out the technology. We really need to have all this counter economy stuff in place before the state collapses.
Yeah, and it's pretty funny about Venezuela because people are using the counter economy as proof of saying, see, capitalism is destroying Venezuela because it popped up. No, capitalism is popping up in Venezuela because they failed.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like they're saying because you've got the official exchange between the bolivar and the dollar, and I think it's like $10 per 10 bolivars per dollar, something like that. They fix it. Of course, in the black market, it's thousands or whatever. I forget what it is, but they're saying, yeah, see, the blame is on the black market for gouging up those prices. Well, if the black market is gouging those prices, why are people buying it from the black market instead of the regular exchange?
Yeah, we kind of saw that with the Articles of the Confederation and the Continental because the only reason people were using the Continental was because many states said you have to use it and you can't use anything else. But if you went to a state that was not really exactly on the Continental, almost nobody used it.
Well, and you just quickly exchange it for a Spanish dollar. However many.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people did. They would.
That's why our currency is the dollar. Yeah. That's not British. The dollar was never a British currency. It's Spanish because that's what people are using. Because it was silver, it was sound money.
Yeah.
The environmental movement's been hijacked by socialists. Yeah, that happened a long time ago.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the co-founder of Greenpeace now despises the organization because it got hijacked by the political activists, because he said, look, when I founded Greenpeace, I just wanted to bring awareness to us to just remind us, we got to be careful because if we're not careful, we can cause nasty pollution, all that. But then it got hijacked by people that said, oh no, we can't just, spread awareness. We have to force people to be aware of the environment. And he was like, no, I'm against that.
Yeah, Isaac Clarke brings up the whole, Amazon kill local business thing. But I mean, imagine if you're in a remote area where you don't have stores like that around. You might have to drive an hour or two to the nearest city to get it. Now you just buy it on Amazon and they deliver it to your door in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Is China technically communist? Yes, China is communist.
Yeah,
Because China is
communist.
moving to a more capitalist economy. Well, they've been making moves to that in recent decades because they've been opening up their markets more and more. But then they turn around and do what they did to Hong Kong, and
Yeah. People fail to realize that China is kind of free market in some areas, but only in areas like Shanghai and stuff like that. Like they have zones where they let, people be more free market, and as long as you're paying your taxes, you can do whatever you want. But in the rest of China, it's still mostly a Maoist society.
Yeah. Yeah, most places in China, you can't just hang up your shingle and say you're in business.
Yeah, that's...
And that's how it is in most of Africa too, because it's saying, "Ooh, capitalism's killing Africa." No, they need more capitalism.
Yeah,
they need the ability to hang up a shingle and set up business without the thugs in their government bulldozing them down.
And actually,
that literally happens. They come back with an actual bulldozer and run it over.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, and actually, Shane, that the whole thing with only certain zones being allowed to be free market capitalists. That's the reason why China has a population density problem. Is having a population density problem because, it's only places like Shanghai, parts of Beijing, and to a lesser extent Hong Kong, where they allowed that. And as consequence, people are moving there because, they want to be able to set up their own shop and be independent. And that's why when you go to Shanghai and whatnot, you see all those street vendors and all that, because that's literally the very few places where they can actually have a business, Yeah.
Lunar Protege, we're polluting the oceans with plastic. Private companies, we've created a trash pickup system for the ocean, so we've solved that. Yeah, the problem is governments aren't letting them use it because there's some restrictions about international waters or something like that.
Winnie the Pooh is communist leader. Yeah, that's still funny. It's like...
Winnie the Pooh is basically banned from China now.
Yeah, that's another thing too, actually. I mean, look, people talk about how Donald Trump's going to be a tyrant and all that. Well, again, I'll give him kudos. At least he's not actually going after people that are making fun of them. In fact, he seems to live off of that. He seems to live off of that. Whereas the Chinese leader, it's like, you compare me to Winnie the Pooh, I'm going to ban it. I mean, come on. Even Kim Il Sung didn't do that when people were comparing him to fat, cartoon characters. Then again, people can't watch those cartoon characters in general, but still,
DJ Arms, global warming is causing the Australia bushfires. Ignore the desert in the country. Yeah, Robert Graham has an article recently on his blog, Errata Security, that's about that. It's like, look, yes, global warming is happening. Yes, we need to reduce our carbon emissions. But just because someone says, hey, it's not going to be the case that San Francisco is going to be underwater in 10 years... and stuff like that. Yeah. That doesn't make you a climate change denier. So I thought that was a pretty good article.
Yeah, that's another thing I hate. I don't deny the climate's changing. I agree. The only thing I disagree on is this idea that mankind is 100% responsible for it, and that it's going to kill us all unless we quote unquote devolve back into caveman. Which is what a lot of people want. A lot of environmentalists out there say, that mankind shouldn't exist on the earth, but we should go back to being cavemen.
Neil Stone, I understand it's mainly communist, but I've been hearing it. Well, I mean, their score on the economic... We're talking about China again. Their score on the Economic Freedom Index has been going up, but they're still, as a country ranking, they're way down there. So they've got a long way to go before they start becoming economically free.
I actually saw this, this thing about China, about how China was portrayed as, throwing people in jail for disagreeing with them, and saying, well, how's that different from America? If you criticize, an American corporation, they'll fire you. It's like, yeah, but they won't throw you in a prison camp in the middle of a desert.
Isaac Clarke, about the overpopulation. Countries with bad economies have higher populations. Well, it's really the birth rate, but with greater economic prosperity, the fertility rate converges on replacement fertility, which is basically every couple has 2 children, they replace themselves, and so you have a more constant population. And so generally with poverty, like you have in Africa, the quote-unquote strategy, I mean, it's driven by evolution and our genes, but the strategy is to just have, a whole bunch of different children. And, I mean, that was the case, I think, let's see, my mother's mother was one of, I think, 20 children, and my father's mother was like one of 15 or something like that. So, I mean, that was just 2 generations ago. and people are having 10 or 20 children, and now they're having two. That's just how much we've progressed. But you also have, when you really have a lot of repressed socialism, like in Greece and to a lesser extent Germany and things like that, you actually have below replacement fertility. So that's a problem too. So you just want better economic prosperity to have a stable population.
Well, to say climate change is a hoax, Zero, that's stretching it, because it is happening. Again, it's just...
The alarmism is a hoax. The idea that we're going to be dead in 20 years unless we pass the leftist agenda right now is a hoax. Yeah.
That's the thing I hate so much is people say, oh, so you're saying climate change is a hoax? No, the alarmism is a hoax. The idea that mankind's 100% responsible and that it's going to kill us all and Earth will be a lifeless desert is bullcrap.
But we do need to reduce our carbon emissions, and we have the perfect solution with nuclear power.
Yeah. Well,
that's something else that drives me crazy about Greenpeace.
Well, that's another thing too. In the few areas where mankind is legitimately responsible for negatively impacting, the Earth, a lot of the environmentalists are against, the technology that could fix it, like nuclear power and the like. And some of them, and a lot of them, are basically saying, "Oh no, we got to go back and we got to be cavemen again because then we won't use natural resources." Even though there's evidence that cavemen did use natural resources, and it's like. So it's bad to drive your car because that produced carbon, but it's okay to use a river as drinking water as a source of bathing and urinating and defecating.
They think that coal deposits in Africa that were easy for societies to get at, 50,000 years ago or whatever, was responsible for a lot of the driving of human civilization. Because that meant they could just do more than just do like campfires. And you see all these pretty sophisticated kilns and stuff like that from that time.
Yeah. You are right about that. Those, you should have a right to call it a hoax. And another thing I really hate about a lot of the environmentalists, and John Stoss has pointed out, is that they don't want to debate, which people are saying, well, they shouldn't have to debate because it's settled. No, you still got to defend it. You should never, be like, a good example is with flat earthers. You shouldn't be saying, oh, you believe in the flat earth. Well, I'm just going to dismiss you, because that doesn't, prove you're superior. That actually makes you look like you're cocky. You should.
It's called the Streisand effect.
Yeah.
But Isaac Clarke recommends Potholer 54 on YouTube. I will second that. His videos are great.
Yeah, if you want.
I think you cut out on us, Darth.
No.
CO2 isn't the enemy. We are putting a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. Yeah, it's gonna. It's not really how much we're putting in, it's how quickly we're putting it in. Because when we burn coal and oil, this represents plant matter, and plants, of course, take carbon from the atmosphere. And generally, oil is from like seaweed and coal is from trees and stuff like that. But we're taking an amount of carbon that was taken out of the atmosphere over a period of millions of years and putting it back in over a period of hundreds of years. Yeah, that's going to have an effect. So it's not anywhere near as bad as Ocasio-Cortez says, but it's still a cause for concern.
Sorry, Clark, but I still doubt that humans are 100% responsible. I think we share partial responsibility, but here's the thing I tell people my point of view from mankind's responsible for it. It's like, yes, we are contributing and we have done some negative things, but in the grand scheme of things, human impact on the environment isn't really going to be a permanent thing.
The CO2 was already on the planet from the beginning. No, it wasn't. CO2 is from biological processes. You had like methane, and you had like sulfur dioxide and all these other stuff before life came along. And yeah, there might be regular chemical processes that produce CO2, but the CO2 we have now is there because of life. Yeah, Neil Stone says, well, one of the reasons I left the left is because they hate nuclear energy, and I understand the science. Yeah. I'm sorry. If you hate nuclear energy, I can only conclude that you just don't understand the science. It's just scary. Ooh, radiation's scary. It's gonna turn us all into Wolfman and stuff like that.
Yeah, look at the temperature. Look at the temperature flux is pretty slow and it's causing like the line of a chop. But since the Industrial Revolution, it went straight up.
That's not quite correct. There was like a period between the 40s and 60s, or not quite 60s, into the 50s, where it cooled down because there was a lot of volcanic activity. And according to the IPCC, the human contribution to global warming has become significant since around 1960, maybe a year or two before. But it's the warming since then that did it. When you see it go up after the Industrial Revolution, it's pretty much a coincidence because we were coming out of the Little Ice Age then. So, but yes, it's the warming since the late 50s that humans have a. We're not solely responsible for it, but that's a good part of it.
Yeah, but the thing is, and this is another thing too that I think gets ignored about, and this is why I hate environmentalists. Is like they can't seem to comprehend that the fact that every single creature on the planet, manipulates the environment to some degree.
Yeah. Oh my God, what did cyanobacteria do to the environment? It wiped out like 99% of all life. Of course, that also created oxygen, which allows us to exist. So some would say that's a net good.
Yeah, it's like it's acting like humans bad, but grass, plants, and animals are good. No, every single plant and animal, even if humans, were gotten rid of, there would still be a lot of that CO2 and carbon buildup because of all the other animals that would be there,
Yeah.
It's been proven that the combined, flatulence of animals, puts a lot of CO2, a lot of the bad CO2 in the atmosphere as well. So
for billions of years, nothing went wrong for the whole biosphere. Zero. Look up this thing called the Permian extinction. I think you'll find it interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, the climate has changed without us. No, it wasn't a nothing burger. Major things happened.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing too that they also talk about is they're like, climate didn't change until humankind came out. No, climate change occurs all the time, In fact, there's plenty of evidence that shows that climate change was already occurring and humans maybe just sped it up a little bit, but that's it. But it was already occurring, so it was still going to happen.
Yeah, just not as fast and...
Yeah,
Okay, and Luna says wolves adapted to the area around Chernobyl. Actually, because they were saying, nothing's going to grow around Chernobyl for hundreds of years. It's actually pretty lively. I mean, look at that place. It's grown up.
Yeah, it's flowing. It's actually, I've actually heard that that it actually is safe for humans, and the only reason people aren't moving back there is because the Ukrainian government won't let them.
Yeah, but I mean, you can stand like right outside the door to the building with a Geiger counter, and you're just reading background levels of radiation. And even when you put on the funny suit and go stand right, almost next to the reactor and look at it, it's dangerous levels if you're there for a while, but it's not like you go in and like instantly you're skeletonized or something like that.
Yeah, and here's another fun fact, the infamous quote-unquote elephant foot in Chernobyl that everyone says is so deadly that it'll kill you if you're just in the same room. There's actually pictures of people in it, and they're only wearing the bare minimal radiation protection, and guess what? They're all alive and healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. People fail to realize, they always talk about how, Chernobyl killed hundreds of people, and it's going to kill, thousands more. The highest thing that it only killed 86 people immediately, and if I recall correctly, it only harmed like a couple hundred of people or so, and even then, the majority of those people were actually people who were involved in the rescue, and trying to put out the fire, and therefore they were in the area and got exposed most.
Yeah, the people who were actually in the building, and the long-term death toll is, I think, around 200, maybe a little more.
Yeah, whereas the general area was actually not too bad, actually.
Well, I mean, it's even worse with Fukushima, because with Fukushima, you had nothing outside the plant, and yet there was all this panic on it. There was really no reason to to evacuate anyone. If you wanted to be precautionary, evacuate people in the immediate area for 2 months until the radioactive iodine levels go down, and then move them back. But there's this whole huge area around that they moved them for, and that was, 9 years ago almost? And they're still doing that, and there have been so many people who have died from things like heart attacks and other consequences of having to live like a refugee all the time, far more than would have been killed from the radiation, which is pretty much zero. I mean, even of the people who were in Fukushima at the time, none of them were killed by radiation.
I remember you'd covered this one time. I think it was in the podcast where there was that one Canadian scientist that studied, Fukushima, and he announced to the entire world, guess what? I've thoroughly examined the data, and I have concluded that Fukushima will not damage anything. There will be no long-term damage, and the area will be relatively safe. And environmental groups, both government and non-profit, private groups, were all like, he's denying!
They gave him death threats!
Yeah.
They sent him death threats. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like, you should be happy. Why aren't you happy?
Yeah, Japan denuclearization is bad. California denuclearization is bad. Yeah.
Well,
if they're worried about all this nuclear waste, then why are they shutting down the plants that can actually process it and make it so that we don't have to put it anywhere?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Although to Japan's defense, I think the United States partially played a role in making Japanese people hate nuclear energy because of what we did to them. We dropped 2 bombs on them, so a lot of people in Japan, when they hear nuclear power, they think of Fat Man and Little Boy.
No, it was pretty much Fukushima, I think. This latest one, anyway. All right, it's 10 o'clock, so we need to be wrapping this up. Maybe we can get another couple of comments in. You got anything more to say there, Darth?
No.
Aren't Fukushima and Nagasaki... Well, Fukushima was never a problem. Nothing was killed at Fukushima. Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which I think is probably what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, they were really bad. Just all these heartbreaking photos of what happened in the wake of that. But they came back really nicely. Like, there's a meme where it shows Hiroshima. It shows Hiroshima right after the bomb, and it's all desolate. And then Hiroshima today, and this is Metropolis. And then they did Detroit then, and Detroit today. Detroit. And if anything, Detroit's worse.
Oh yeah. I think it was Walter Williams who said there's actually a much better way to destroy a city without resorting to nuclear weapons, and that's simple: implement rent control and housing regulations.
I'll boil it down for you, Zero. If you want to play it safe, then you want nuclear, because it's the safest form of power we know of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's another thing too. They rant and rave about nuclear power, but they completely ignore, the environmental problems, with other quote unquote renewable resources like solar and wind energy, when it's actually been proven that wind energy is actually contributing to the downcline in certain bird species.
Yeah, because it messes with their migratory patterns. All right.
Yeah, it messes with... Okay.
Okay, finish your thought.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Who was our $5? I think YouTube was supposed to show me that at the top, and it stopped doing that. Someone gave me the $5 super chat there. I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, and YouTube's not showing that to me. Because it might have been a Streamlabs one, which means I get the entire $5. YouTube doesn't take their 30%. So thanks for that. And thanks for everyone who participated. Thanks, Chris, for having this conversation with me.
Yep.
And for everyone else, until next time, stay strong and be free.
Oh, I'm just going to say this one thing real quickly, because Pitsqueak brought up a good point. Everyone freaks out about radiation, but the rate of absorption is the important part. Yeah, people fail to realize radiation is everywhere.
Yep. We said this a couple of live streams ago. We are radioactive because we have potassium in our bodies.
Almost every single chemical in the known universe is radioactive to a degree.
Yep. All right, I'd already stopped the stream, but I'm still recording it, so this will be on when we put it up. So I'm going to stop the recording now. So thanks again, everyone.